Those who sing and dance about tobacco are mainly concerned by the smoke, but smoke has been an intimate part of all our lives since humanity first used fire. In the summer of 2003, I was able to visit Orkney and the Outer Hebrides. Orkney is famous for its Stone Age remains, and I set out to explore some of them. That was how I came to Skara Brae. In the winter of 1850, there had been a severe storm. It stripped the grass from some dunes on mainland Orkney, revealing an ancient settlement of ruined buildings. This was the village of Skara Brae. It had been inhabited 5,000 years ago, before either the pyramids or Stonehenge were built. Not only had the buildings themselves been preserved, but, being made of stone, so also had the furniture. This made it possible to see how our Stone Age ancestors had lived. Each house consisted of a central fireplace with box beds on either side, a dresser against the wall opposite the door, and several storage areas. It was constructed entirely of stone. With no soft furnishings of bracken and animal hides, it all looks rather uncomfortable. The nature of the roof was unknown. It is a mystery how light got in and smoke out. Then as now, Orkney was almost totally without trees. The only wood available would have been driftwood floating across the Atlantic from the forests of North America. That wood would have been necessary for building boats, roof timbers and tool handles, and far too precious to burn. It is not known exactly what was used for the fire, for the peat that is so abundant on Orkney today did not form until several centuries after the settlement was abandoned. It was probably a mixture of animal dung, dried seaweed, heather and bracken. Being vegetable rather than fossil matter, tobacco belongs to a similar category. Several days later, I came to Arnall on the west coast of Lewis. There I was able to walk round a preserved crofter's cottage known as a black house. The walls consisted of an inner and outer skin of stone with a central core of peat and earth 5 feet thick and a roof of thatch. Rumour has it that whisky stills were hidden in the thickness of the walls. The houses had to withstand severe storms. You can see how the thatch was held in place by a net with large stones tied to it. In the centre of the living room floor, which measured about 15 feet by 12, was a central hearth, just like the houses at Skara Brae, but it burned peat. The pots and kettle hung from a chain fastened to the roof ridge, the strongest part of the roof timbers. There was no chimney or smoke hole. The smoke slowly made its way out through the thatch, and in so doing preserved surplus meat or fish hung from the rafters. The only openings in the thatch were small rectangular roof lights. The living room led to a sleeping room through a wooden door. It too was about 15 feet by 12. It contained 2 double-box beds, making 3 in all, with one opening directly into the living room. The sleeping room and the living room floors were roughly paved with flagstones. At the other end of the building, separated by a partition, was the cowshed, which measured about 24 feet by 12. A barn for storing and winnowing grain ran parallel with the house and cowshed, with its own roof, but sharing a common wall. 3 generations lived together in such dwellings. Everyone, including pregnant mothers and children, spent long winter hours wreathed in smoke. It was a question of the survival of the fittest, and those whose lungs could not cope with smoke were stillborn or died young. The lungs of our ancestors would therefore have been naturally selected to cope with smoky atmospheres. During winter, neighbours would call. The fire could be built as high as they liked because there was no chimney to catch fire. It would have been here that the ceilidh originated, as neighbours gathered on long winter evenings to discuss the world, gossip, sing, and perhaps sip the illicit produce of a still. The smoky atmosphere must have resembled a modern public house before the smoking ban. In summer they could go outside to dance. The ceilidh tradition lives on. Whole villages of such dwellings were inhabited until as recently as 1974. Here is a picture of some housewives taken in the 70s after a lifetime of passive smoking. They were as kippered as the herrings in their rafters. My Scottish grandmother was a crofter's wife too, and always dressed identically to these women. But she lived in luxury, with a kitchen range, a chimney, and a loo at the bottom of the garden. She lived to 96. Similar dwellings had existed in England. There are numerous reconstructions of Saxon houses. They did not have to withstand Hebridean storms. They too had a central fire with no chimney, so that smoke made its way out through the thatch. Had there been an opening for the smoke to escape, the draught would have caused the fire to flare and set fire to the roof. The public house, with its smoky atmosphere and crowded camaraderie, is thus a relic of a very ancient domestic tradition and its associated folk memory.